All right. So, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
My name's Simon Hobson. I'm professionally a mining engineer. Came to mining quite late in life. Previous to that, I was a professional cyclist. Very active in politics generally, but specifically trying to advance Wales and help build a better future for Wales.
Great. I'm going to ask you about what you're doing in politics and your political activities. But I want to start, first of all, by giving you a chance to explore your neurodivergence. When we were talking about this, is something that we thought would be good to discuss. So, can you tell me more about your neurodivergence?
Yes, it's an interesting concept. 45 years old, just turned 45. I grew up going to school in the 1980s and 1990s. And I was lucky in many ways in that I went to a village school with only about 60 children in Sussex. And there was never really any suspect of me having any form of neurodivergence because I don't think anyone ever really considered it then. And because it was a village school and it was the 1980s, the teachers I can see now didn't really teach. They just used to let us run around in the fields, which was fantastic. I think is what a childhood should be, rather than all these tests. But consequently, none of the neurodivergent aspects of myself got picked up until I went to secondary school at the age of 10 years old. And it was about then that I started to struggle. And it quite quickly became apparent that I was severely dyslexic in the English language and spelling and so forth. Now, that's something that I've grown to accept. And with the advancement of technologies, particularly with autocorrect, then word processors, but now obviously PCs and software on phones that just pretty much negate any issues as far as being dyslexic is concerned, because if you've got the language skills, that helps you through the spelling aspect. But something that's been new to me, and I've only actually been diagnosed and developed the understanding for in the last 18 months, is my ASD and ADD, the autism spectrum and the attention deficit disorder. In hindsight, is pretty obvious, but it's not something that through my childhood I was at all aware with. And as I've just hinted, most of my adult life. So that's something that I'm still learning to understand. And one of the things that's helped me understand that is my stepson, he's 8 years old now, and myself and my partner have been through the process of having him officially assessed and, as it were, labeled with the autism, ADHD, and giftedness. I'm actually based in Quebec for my job, and my partner's Quebecois. Here it's called twice exceptional. And it's through learning about my ADHD and how to accommodate him that I've started to become more aware of my own needs and how my reactions to the world differ from the sort of neurotypical individual.
What was the things that set steps and that you were able to learn about yourself?
It's been really interesting to discover that I'm not as weird as perhaps something that did come out of school that I was marked by and maybe had some impact on me psychologically was the sense of difference. Now, when you're at primary school, I don't think that is an issue. Children generally very accepting, and you are who you are, no matter how you interpret the world or obviously as a child how you play, how you interpret play. That's something that was accepted about myself. But as I moved into that adult world, I had to conform, as it were, with societal expectations of how an adult is perceived and how an adult responds to a situation. It became harder. So I'm talking about my late teens here, to understand why people didn't get me. I've always thought that I was very clear in what I was trying to express to people. And I'm fortunate in that I have articulate parents who have imparted the love of language. And despite my dyslexia, I've never had a fear of language or reading, although it's always taken me a lot longer to achieve those things. So that was on my side. But it was very obvious that the way that I saw the world and saw problems or issues or interpreted situations was significantly different to other people. And I started getting into, I mentioned already, I was a professional cyclist. And I think a lot of the reasons why I took to cycling was it was a solace for my brain. It was a place I could escape the expectations and having to mask who I was. Spending 4 hours on a bicycle every day training was great. It kept me sane as I could be. It was an avoidant strategy without me knowing it was an avoidant strategy.
And for being diagnosed in your 40s, that is something that the many who will get diagnosed now, that is something that may be typical for them. But the stereotype is that men and male people do get diagnosed a lot. So what was it like then, only figuring out in your late 40s?
I'm still going through these emotions, and it's quite violent swings of sentiments of sadness at not having that understanding earlier in my life, so that I could have made changes to how I approached the world, but also being more forgiving on myself. And then from the sadness, the opposite of that is the anger, and being angry at parents and educators for not having recognized that in myself. But of course, I have to caveat that with that educators and parents in the 1980s and 1990s, in fact, in the early 2000s, weren't particularly aware of this. And this is something that is clearly only becoming understood more so in the last, well, probably really only the last 5 to 8 years.
I definitely think that to a certain extent, social media, I know a lot of people discovering these things, the lockdowns and the pandemics, and I know that was a big impact on discovering that. But as you said, you had a bit of anger and sadness, but also, how was it when you were going through the process of getting diagnosed, learning that you're autistic and ADD? What was it piecing the things together that you realised you were autistic and you had ADHD or ADD, as you say? And what was it, the reaction from your parents and the family and community around you?
I don't think I would have ever identified the ADD and the ASD unless I'd had a relationship with the lady I'm currently with and acquired a stepson that was going through the same process. It was him and his way of responding to the world and professionals that were around him explaining to him that was the autism and hyperactivity aspect of his character as to why he interpreted the world in that way that started to help the penny drop in my head, because a lot of how he approaches the world is how I have approached the world in the past. And a lot of the things that he is struggling with or finding painful in life, both just from a day-to-day interaction point of view, but also the way that he developed through school, is something that I have memories of my own childhood. So it wasn't until that interaction that I even had an inkling that there may be the autism and the ADD for myself. Fortunately, and I am very appreciative of this, in a position where I'm able to seek private professional help to identify these. And I know that if you're relying on public services, it is extremely difficult and can be many years, if at all, getting the services. But I was able to go the private route and have the one-to-ones with the professionals to identify these traits, which obviously it doesn't solve any problems. It doesn't take back the years that you've missed parts of yourself, but it does help me ground the now and how I approach the future.
Yeah, and I guess probably to be fully able to understand yourself, as you said early on, to forgive yourself from some of the things you've gone through, and just to be able to try to, I guess, be able to explain how you felt you weren't like everyone else, or now that certain feeling that you were different, to be able to kind of have an answer to that. I guess that might have been part of why you went to the diagnosis, and just to be really able to learn about yourself. But also, I know we went to chat about, as you said, with the public services and how you went private. I'll chat about in that moment, but one of the things that got you on to chat to you about is your involvement in politics and how you, but I want to start with that, is how you got involved with politics, or how that started out for yourself.
Yeah, certainly. I think, again, with the benefit of hindsight and understanding who I am a bit better now, I think the attraction to politics, and it's the same reason as to why I was attracted to cycling and then post the cycling attracted to becoming a mining engineer, is because they are processes that I think appeal to my neurodivergent brain. There are, to me, obvious solutions to issues, challenges, and problems that people day to day living and society face. As an engineer, it's inherent on me professionally to look at where there might not yet be a problem and could be a problem, to stop that happening, and to answer people's questions and solve other people's issues with regards to building a mine, a pit, underground drives, shafts, and so forth. That was, I didn't know it in the engineering terms then, but it was probably about 25 years ago, maybe a bit longer than that, that I started to get purposefully involved in politics. But my care for the world came out of being brought up in a rural community and around farming families and being interested in wildlife. So I can remember going and helping out on Friends of the Earth stalls and things like that at the age of 11 and 12. A part of that was because a friend's father was quite heavily involved in Friends of the Earth. It just got taken along, but it meant something to me then. And that drew me into politics. And long story short, I first stood for election as a Liberal Democrat member in Winchester in Hampshire in England. I'd done that 4 times for the Winchester City Council, so that's district council equivalent. It was second every time to the Conservatives. And then last year took on a seat in Devon. Torridge was the constituency for the Liberal Democrats for the Westminster election, which I didn't actually get through to polling day. And the reason for that was I was still going through a lot of what we've been talking about and understanding myself. And unfortunately, I'd thrown myself into the politics at the expense of my own health. Just as I was needing to ratchet up my activity, it was obvious that I was in quite severe autistic burnout. And I've only in the last few months started to recover from that.
Yeah, and with that, I want to start to ask you a bit more about your backstory, about the sense of where you got involved with party politics, where you joined the Liberal Democrats, and why did you think of standing for election?
I wanted to get the United Kingdom changed. In my teens, I went to a sixth form college, which was quite old-fashioned in its structures. It wasn't a fee-paying school, but it was structured in a similar way. And we had prefects, and then we had a student council with elected presidents. And I got elected as the president of the student council. And I've always been very vehement in my views on things. I was attracted to the Liberal Democrats 25 years ago because I believed in a federal. There were two things that drew me to become a member of the Liberal Democrats: federalising the United Kingdom and proportional representation. Because I thought those two things would put power back into the hands of people in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and really change politics. Over the years, the pragmatism of politics has become a realization for myself. I have also reached the point where I don't believe the Liberal Democrats want to change the system. I think they're too embedded in the Westminster structure, and the likes of the leader, Sir Ed Davey, he likes the way it's going for him at the moment. Obviously, the Liberal Democrats are currently positioning themselves to take over the mantle of the Conservatives, which, from an electoral system point of view, first past the post, Westminster, is a very intelligent thing to do from his side of things. It's right to position your policies to appeal to the home counties, but it isn't my politics. So I've actually left the Liberal Democrats now. And part of that was for those reasons. And part of that was also there is, and I believe this is probably certainly from talking to family and friends who are members of Plaid Cymru and the Labour Party, Conservatives. I believe that this is what I'm about to say is also true of those parties, but there is a fair bit of institutional inter-party bullying. And although the Liberal Democrats have Liberal and Democrat in their title, from my personal experiences, I would say the party is neither. It's really, it's supposedly run, policies are supposedly presented and voted on by members and shaped by members, but actually to get a policy in front of the conference it's very difficult, and it tends to only be the policies that the leadership in the centre in London want to be debated that get debated.
From your time within the Liberal Democrats, what has been things that you witnessed, that you wish that you frustrated with, that you saw the leaders pushing forward, saw the main party like pushing forward in Parliament and etc. And in the main campaign of the election, that you feel as the membership yourself, you were pushing for that wasn't getting anywhere.
I was hopeful when Nick Clegg took the Liberal Democrats into coalition with the Conservatives at the time. So at the time, I was actually working for the Liberal Democrats as a constituency organiser. I did that between the years of 2005 and 2010, and it was the coalition that resulted in me resigning. And not solely, I also wanted to do more for myself, which is when I took on the undergraduate degree to become a mining engineer. But I was quite hopeful that Liberal Democrats in government would bring at least the electoral reforms and deliver more powers to Wales. And really, although we can see post the 2015 election where the Conservatives were really let rip on the austerity, and there clearly was a moderating factor that the Liberal Democrats brought to the coalition government to stop the Conservatives doing everything that they eventually did. But it wasn't radical. It wasn't what I wanted from a Liberal government or a government which had a Liberal involvement. That was what put the nail in the coffin as far as my belief in the Liberal Democrats wanting to change the Westminster structure. I'm incredibly loyal as a person, and I mean, it's a stereotype, but I understand that a sense of fairness and loyalty is something that is quite common with autistic people, and certainly I see that with my stepson. He has a lot of internal conflict when it comes to balancing things for himself. What's best for him will often be put secondary because of his wish to be fair and wish to interpret the world in a fair and just way. I stuck with the Liberal Democrats until now, until this year, hoping that I could change things. Obviously, it wasn't to be. But if I may to go back to when I was a constituency organiser, I was the organiser for the Liberal Democrats in Winchester in Hampshire in England. And at the time, now they've re-elected a Liberal Democrat for that constituency, Danny Chambers, who's excellent, good MP. And we had a good Liberal Democrat MP when I was working there as well. His name was Mark Oaten. And I learnt a lot about media and about politics from the experience, but it was when things first started to sour for me. And the party went after him because he was good personal friends with Charles Kennedy. I love Charles Kennedy as well. And the likes of Ming Campbell, Ed Davey, and Nick Clegg and others turned on him because of his alcoholism and seeing an opportunity to take the leadership. Mark Oaten stepped in because, as he saw it, and I agree with him, it looked like they were going to have some sort of great coronation of Ming Campbell as the leader, and Mark stepped in to compete for the leadership. That led to an individual coming forward about Mark with regards to him being gay. He was at the time married, and a lot of nastiness happened within the party there, as well as the media being interested in that story. Soured my views of party politics, the politics within parties itself. But it also is something that I think, looking back on it from now, I don't think it would be an issue today. I don't think it would be a story today. That's great that society's moved on and accepted people are who they are and they discover themselves when they discover themselves. If you happen to be a public figure or an MP or something, it's unfortunate because you tend to attract more criticism. But it's great that being gay is obviously a non-issue nowadays. And I hope that having a neurodivergent view on the world soon reaches that status as well.
Yeah, but I think it's definitely something that possibly for trans non-binary people, there might be now a similar issue if an MP was, as you referenced, these issues have been openly gay. I think there could be concerns, be similar issues around being so open, and because there's a lot of negative media traction, but point out, with you saying that autistic people can be incredibly loyal and it can get how overwhelming the decision between what to do with your loyalness, because often the fairness and your personal values and principles go before that. And I guess it's something that loyalty to a party or a person can never come before that. And I guess that was a thing for you. But in terms of what you wanted to see as the party being radical, and what do you think was the straw on the camel's back on this that you felt he had to leave. And did you think that the autistic burnout from the election campaign worked for that? What that reason to leave the party?
So I never understood, obviously, till the last couple of years, that autistic burnout was something, a thing that anyone could ever have. So I have been to doctors and specialists, psychotherapists, for on and off for about 20 years now, thinking that I suffered from depression, maybe bipolar, and the medical profession, GPs, usually, I've met a couple of great GPs that have kept me going, but most of them just want you out of the surgery as quickly as possible. And I've been through a number of medications supposedly treating depression. Since I've understood that it's autistic burnout, and what I need to do is build time into my week and time into my working schedule for myself, to put away screens, maybe have a dark room for an hour or two and just exclude the world. I haven't had a depressive episode or bout since then. So it clearly isn't depression in that genuine medical sense. That has always, fortunately, had some deep impacts on my decision making. And that certainly goes to the politics. I've been exhausted, I understand now, and made perhaps not the wisest of decisions in those states. But it's something that understanding the autism and understanding the need for build those breaks in has broken that cycle. I certainly would urge anybody to understand themselves better in that way and be more forgiving with themselves and build those times for relaxing and taking a break from the world so that you can recuperate. To answer your question about the straw that broke the camel's back with regards to Liberal Democrats and that party politics, it was very recently. I don't know if many of your listeners have read my things in Nation Cymru or Bylines Cymru, but I've been writing and campaigning for a more radical liberalism in Wales, for the Welsh Liberal Democrats to take on the empty centre ground. I think Wales is the whole United Kingdom at the moment, but particularly Wales, which has a history of traditional liberalism and liberal values. That centre ground is completely empty, and there's a great opportunity there. And with the Senate elections of May 2026 and this new closed party system that's going to be electing the next bunch of Senate members, that's going to use a DeHont system. It's going to be, to equate it to something that people may be familiar with, if you remember back to when the United Kingdom was in the European Union, one would go and vote regionally for a party rather than an individual. And it's going to be like that for the Senate, because the parties decide who's on that list. There's 6 seats per constituency. So 6 people are elected within the party to represent each seat. I have been pushing for the Liberal Democrats in Wales to fill that centre ground. And part of that was being more open to accepting that federalism is a thing of the past and accepting that blindly following the Ed Davey home counties policies wasn't going to be any good for Wales. Wales is a distinctly different political body. The people of Wales, the electorate of Wales, need different solutions to those of Southern England. And for me, my politics has moved further towards believing that a thorough exploration and openness of the possibilities of independence for Wales has to be discussed politically. That goes completely against the unionist policies of the Welsh Liberal Democrats. And I was roundly criticised and harassed for my views on that. And I put my name forward to be considered for selection for one of the lists for the Senate elections next year. And the Welsh Liberal Democrat executive, the hierarchy that manage the party within Wales, who are largely retirees from England, tend to be men over 60. They decided that my views weren't valid and they had me deselected federally from the centre, from London. So it got to a point where I thought, if a Liberal Party, supposedly Liberal Party, isn't open to having these conversations, then it's not the party for me.
What would you say is your main pitch or your main vision for what radical liberalism would mean for Wales?
In reality, Wales has so much potential. And I'm coming from this as someone that grew up in England. My mother is from Pontypool. My grandparents on her side are from there, and Ceredigion. Farming family on both sides of my family. My dad's from Yorkshire. Everybody moved to the south of England for economic reasons. My grandparents and obviously my parents ended up being there. And for me, I don't want future generations in Wales to have to move out of Wales. If they'd like to move out of Wales somewhere else in the world, then that's fantastic. Like myself now, through being a mining engineer, I've enjoyed having the flexibility and the opportunities to live and work in places like Africa and South America, and now I'm here in Quebec, Canada. If you choose to do that, that's fantastic, and I would encourage more people to do that. But I think that Wales deserves and can have an economy that is globally significant. The issue is that the brain drain of Wales means that the political class in Wales is subpar. There are a few individuals within Wales, within the politics of all parties, that have got the vision and the intelligence to take Wales forward. But most people there, and this is partly because I think of Labour having been there for 26 years, there's a low level corruption, civil service through the parties. Plus, of course, the Senate was, in my view, purposefully set up to be dysfunctional. It's something that Westminster rushed through. I don't think there was necessarily malice in the process of setting up the Senate or the Welsh Assembly as was, but it certainly, many things in the United Kingdom wasn't properly thought through. The processes and the legislative powers weren't seen through and given to Wales. So my politics has moved significantly from when I first joined the Liberal Democrats in response to the way that I've seen Wales treated by Westminster and Westminster-focused politicians.
And how do you, I guess, something of that, how you feel that Wales, in terms of how Wales was organised, well, the Senedd was organised and set up and has been running and constitutionally arranged ever since. How have you felt from that there is distinct differences from the Senedd to Hollywood and how that was set up, and as there's key distinct power differences are between the two devolved bodies?
So Holyrood, Scotland itself, they, as I understand the way that it's structured, they benefit in a far greater sense to the Union than does Wales. So it seems almost ironic that the Scots are far more vehement in their independence movement than is the case in Wales. The much talked about Barnett formula has benefits for Scotland, whereas it only ever does damage in recent years for certain for Wales. If there was a genuine desire to rid us of the Barnett formula in the United Kingdom, to fund according to need nationally and regionally within England, that would go a great way towards solidifying the union. There seems, from an idealistic Liberal Democrat point of view, the federalised United Kingdom seems a sacrosanct idea within the Liberal Democrats, and realistically it doesn't work. And I know that it can't work because I've had life experience now. I'm living in a federal system in Canada. I've worked in places like Argentina, which is federalized, a little bit in Belgium. And certainly here, Quebec's a very good example of what Wales could be doing to stand up for itself more. One of the things I often get quizzical looks at when I'm talking to Quebecois people that are into politics, pretty much everybody here is into politics if you're in Quebec. So Quebec had its Quiet Revolution in the 1960s, which allowed it politically to throw off the Anglosphere, and also the Catholic Church had a massive influence on life here back then. And since that time, Quebec has really pushed its rights over its energy, its minerals. One of the early things that Quebec did, which I think Wales could and should do, is had its formulated Hydro-Quebec, which is what its name says. It's a hydropower energy company, which is owned by the government of Quebec. There's so many things like that that Wales could and should be doing and should be pushing for. And whilst the Senate might not have powers to allow it to do that today, I don't see a political class in Wales advocating for it. There are obviously people that are saying they want things like that, but they're not causing bother. Quebec works in a Westminster structure that it's inherited from times of colonial times when Canada was part of the British Empire. And the politicians of Quebec have learned how to push back against Ottawa. And it's something that I believe the Senate should be doing. All parties in the Senate, if they care about Wales, should be agitating for Wales. They should be pushing back at Westminster and saying, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to do that. Or that's not good for us as a people. Or we want control over our resources. We in Wales, the Welsh diaspora I include in that, have, with my mining engineer hat on, there's so much that could be done with mining still in Wales. And I know that mining in a lot of people's heads has bad connotations to the environment, but it's a very different industry nowadays, and the footprint is extremely small and would be in somewhere like Wales. Just to give an example, which is both mining and energy related, there's coal bed methane. All the coal mines that have closed down, underground mines, they're still producing methane. They're still producing a gas which is effectively quite detrimental to global climate change, but it could be tapped into. It could be used to drive turbines and produce electricity. But as I understand the current legislation in the Senate, there's a moratorium on doing anything with hydrocarbons. So that isn't even explored. And I think Wales needs to be open to all these things and be far more ambitious about subjects such as that. one of the things that this has all led on to is myself and some others have co-founded New Wales, which is, others would classify it as a cross-party political think tank. And the purpose of it is to have these type of conversations about what the citizens of Wales want Wales to be and how Wales can improve itself. And we encourage conversation and involvement from everybody from every angle: unionists, federalists, independentists, industrialists, market advocates, socialists, whoever one might be in the political sphere, to get involved and have a say. But part of that is I have been speaking with a lot of the Welsh diaspora, and they are incredibly keen on investing back into Wales, being involved, helping government, helping young entrepreneurs, but are equally incredibly frustrated that there aren't avenues and ways for them to do that. And the government at the Senate seems very switched off from that. Hopefully that will change post next year's elections. And one of the things, to go back to your question about Holyrood and Scotland, Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, they all seem to know what they are internationally. They have a better story, a more thought through story about who they are as a people than does Wales. And I think until Wales gets that sorted in its own head, it's going to be difficult for Wales to project itself globally.
Yeah, the thing that I wanted to touch upon is I know from previous interviews that I've done with different people, including the latest interview I just done, it was with somebody from DPAC, the Disabled People Against Cuts. She's it from England, and even though there's the sentiment there that there's disillusionment, distrust within the political system, and a lot of disabled people do feel excluded from politics, that there is a great sentiment across Wales within the political, within the sphere of Welsh people, that they do feel that politics and Wales don't work for them and don't feel able to get engaged or involved. That's something that with New Wales, that's the name of your new think tank. That's something you've probably been discussing and highlighting of how we get a representation. But to look at that, but can you explore how that your new project with New Wales intersects with the rights of disabled people and neurodivergent people, and how you look to include them in the picture of what you wish to do for Wales?
So New Wales is about the citizens being involved in designing Wales, thinking of what Wales needs to become. And I would say that thinking needs to change as to how the world is set up. Everything is set up for the, as it were, neurotypical. And really it's about reversing it rather than, so from a neurodiverse point of view, which is obviously my lived experience, but from physical disabilities as well, it's about redesigning society so that they're not things that are graciously catered for by everyone else, but are just assumed in the design. You have to put this in. These people are part of our society and they have things to contribute, great things to contribute. So from the edge, something that I'm very personally passionate about, the educational structure, it's largely built around a supply and demand of labour that was thought of and constructed in the Victorian era to get people educated enough, this is a personal view, that they can read and write and turn up to work at the right time. We don't live in that world anymore. We, like myself, a vast amount of my work is done in a similar way as we're having this interview, through video conferencing writing reports. I'd fly out to different countries to look at different mine sites. I then write a report about it. I have telephone calls. The going into an office or going into a factory, whilst it's the reality for people still today, it won't be in 20, 50 years from now. And so New Wales and the whole of society need to start having the conversation and thinking about, how do you advantage future generations? How do you advantage the nation of Wales so that it's already putting in place aspects which are going to be internationally competitive, that it's going to have structures in place which are just by themselves, they're not special, they're not specially inviting disabled people or neurodivergent people to graciously be part of something. Society is involving them just through how we've redesigned it. And so that's what I hope will come out of New Wales. It's what I hope will come out of political discourse in the Senedd as it goes forward. And I hope it's what is the direction that the whole world's going in, really.
What are the examples of issues around education, like specific examples from conversations I've had with people, as well as looking at the health system? Because you said that you had previous negative experiences within the health system with GPs. What are the noticeable problems you have seen, whether it be in Wales and maybe elsewhere, and the solutions you think that could apply across the field for disabled people? And how do you think that the politicians now and where the political parties are looking to address some of these issues, or the issues that they have and the policies problems they have on this?
Look, I think when it comes down to any of these issues, it's about realizing that we're human beings dealing with other human beings, whether that's politics, medical, education. At the moment, our society is being driven towards, and is continually being driven towards, a market knows best approach. Now, as a centrist liberal, I do believe that there is a very strong place for markets, and I believe in markets. I believe the power of markets to help society improve itself and to help individuals become personally wealthier and better themselves. But they're not the answer to everything. There has to be a human element, and therefore markets need to be regulated. They need to be understood, and they need to have controls over them. And that comes from politicians having a narrative, a vision for their country. And it's something that isn't there in the United Kingdom, and at the moment doesn't seem to be there in Wales. So if you want education to be the best it can be and to accommodate the majority, it goes back to what I said earlier. It's about building a structure that isn't kindly taking account of people with ASD or dyslexia. It's structured so that those people are automatically thought of. And one of the things with education is, and it staggers me that it isn't higher up on people's concerns when polled, if you don't get your educational system right and you don't educate people to a level where they're able to question the world, think for themselves, the critical thinking skills, question how the status quo shapes their lives and their way of thinking, you're failing every other aspect of society. the way you educate children today shapes how your society is in the future. I don't believe that testing children to death on whether they can spell or how quickly they can read a sentence is helping society. I believe there needs to be an accommodation for, there may be people that are just naturally pure academics, and obviously that they deserve a route as is currently there for them now. But there are people such as myself who, I've always loved learning and I loved school. It was hard and I got terrible results as far as the exams are concerned, but I enjoyed it. And as I said earlier in our conversation, I was lucky because I had people around me in the family that supported the learning process. But a lot of children don't have that. And that's perhaps because the education systems let down their parents or their grandparents. So for me, going forward, primary focus would be on building an educational structure where people love learning and love to teach themselves as they go forward in life.
And also looking at that as well with health and welfare and people's own personal finances, and looking at the concerns disabled people have in terms of the cost of living crisis and the healthcare system, and obviously, there are stories about issues, lack of having an amount of doctors in the health centres, lack of funding and support for the mental health services, long waiting lines for assessments through the NHS for autism and ADHD, and the actual reasonable adjustments and health services being met. How have you thought throughout doing starting up New Wales, and yourself, somebody who commentates on the news for websites like Nation Cymru and Byline Cymru, how have you perceived those issues and certain disabled people might bring up if you were to chat to them?
So there are obviously immediate needs. And I understand that's where most people's heads are today. I'm an oddity in many ways, but particularly in my passion and the time I give to thinking about politics every day. And I also understand that is a luxury. And I'm very fortunate to have that ability, that time, and the financial cushion through my mining engineering job to earn a salary that gives me that ability. And as I talked to you already about being able to go private to find medical professionals for mental health and so forth. When it comes to New Wales, we invite people to write on this for us, with us, to inject their lived experiences so that we can have that more round conversation as to what solutions might be. I think in a grander scheme of what Wales could be and should be, there ought to be a coming together of citizens to construct a Bill of Rights for Wales, a constitution for Wales, which, in my view, would enshrine people's rights to access all these services. Obviously, the economy and the finances and paying for these professionals gets thrown back at any politician that puts these ideas forward. But it's the same as education. In fact, education is part of it. And this is the thing that's, for my mind, frustrating about politics, is it's not an either or. Everything is connected in the world. We know this from the way that nature interacts. We know this from the way that climate interacts with activities that animals, trees, humans, everybody does. There's always a knock on from some other unexpected source. And goes back to education. If you get your education right and you educate people, you are cutting out a lot of the issues that then lead to the mental health crises. Obviously, you can't account for global pandemics. That's slightly different when it comes to answering people's mental health. But a lot of things can be resolved by educating people on how they can help themselves, in my view. As far as the financing is concerned, people have to understand that the United Kingdom as a whole is an extremely low taxed nation when it comes to its position certainly in the rest of Europe, and even from what I've experienced in the US. So the US is seen as an entrepreneurial, business-friendly environment, but the taxes are pretty high in the US. And obviously, if you're a US citizen, you're taxed wherever you live and work in the world, which you don't have as an expat from the United Kingdom. So there's the taxation that people need to understand. If they want services, they have to pay more tax. It comes back to also the economy, understanding that the power to change Wales' economy is and should be increasingly put into people's hands in Wales rather than Westminster's. There's also, as I've already alluded to, a lot of wealth. There's about 3 million Welsh diaspora members in the world. Most of them have done quite well for themselves. That's why they went abroad to earn money and live a better life. And the majority of them want to be involved in Wales. So there are people there with skills and investment and connection to money that would invest into Wales. And these are all avenues that haven't been explored, that need to be explored by the politicians in the Senate.
Yeah, I know the issue of taxing and progressive taxing on the more wealthy is something that has come up in previous interviews with guests. As said with previous guests, was being a member of GPAC, and there's also another one who's campaigned against the certain PIP and welfare cuts. But to also bring up on the current issue that we're ahead of the next Senedd election, there's the issue of growing more of a reform. And how do you feel that it seems that Wales has moved, the electorate has moved away from a more globalist approach and into a more form of nationalism that is anti-immigration? So how do you feel about the concern of reform, and how do you think other parties in Wales need to combat that sentiment and the concerns that people who are going to vote for reform?
So when it comes down to it, human beings are animals. We're part of the natural world. Our evolution, for all the technology, we're still quite basic in our biological evolution. And part of that, in my view, is it's easier to fear things. In fact, it's an evolutionary advantage to fear something. It keeps you alive. But what that means in terms of politics and in reference to populism and maybe Reform UK comes into this, is that when people feel under pressure, when they feel that resources are short, their natural response is to fear. I personally think that citizens of Wales are centrist, liberal, embracing, loving people that have strong communities and are open to the world. But Westminster and the mismanagement of the globalization, the mismanagement of markets has created a distrust for those things. It's rather than increasing the wealth of everybody, it's clearly, and the evidence is there now, focused the wealth on people that already had the capital to invest and grow that wealth. So there's a feel of not having the resources, a scarcity. And when you get into scarcity mindset, you fight for what little you have. That's biology. And I think politically that's what's happening with reform. Reform will rely on. They're relying on people's fear. They're relying on people's sense of not having what they think they should have. But then there's also the other side, the electorate, the individual, the likes of you and I. We also need to be a little more realistic about what we need in life. And I am not in a position to lecture how other people want to live their lives, but personally, I'm appreciative of the family, the access to countryside and food that I have. Now, I appreciate there are many people that are struggling even with those things. And that is something that clearly needs an answer and isn't going to be resolved by blaming other people or moving to any extreme, be that right or left.
I try not to keep you too longer, but I know you got a podcast yourself coming out soon. I'll go on to ask one or two more questions, but can you tell me about that podcast you got coming out?
So the podcast is called Blueprint Cymru. It's part of New Wales Project. The objective of those podcasts is to talk to different people from within Wales and also the Welsh diaspora, and to explore many of the things that we've already been discussing today, how their experience and their knowledge could be used and people like them to reshape and create the blueprint for future Wales.
And what are the things that you found from doing these podcast interviews? Are there any things that you found from it that add to your vision of the blueprint of Wales?
I think what's clear is that Wales needs to believe in itself more. There's so much that Wales can give to the world. As I've said already,
Yeah.
it needs to work out what it is first. And that there are literally millions of the Welsh diaspora that want the best for Wales, as well as everybody that's living and working in Wales day to day.
And I want to touch upon is going back to when we discussed about reform and the certain issues around that. What are the things that other political parties or other people can do to combat, as you say, the sense of fear and the sense of things that will hold disabled and intersectional minorities back in society from the rise of reform and rise of the populism on it?
So reformer are relying on people's fear and people's feeling of being left out. And whilst there's an element of truth to that, there's also an incredible amount of power in people's hands that I think isn't used by people. And it's not just about electing people to the Senate or Westminster. It's about getting involved in community groups. And people might throw back at me, if you're struggling day to day, you haven't got the time or the energy to do that. And I understand that, but it's quite difficult to just ask everyone else to change things for you. If you want something changed, you have to go and change it yourself. It's something that, from my experience with the neurodivergence and the autism stuff, I was lucky it was made aware to me, but everything else in my life, I've altered to accommodate that now. And I think people, generally speaking, must do that for their lives politically in order to advocate for themselves. And perhaps that's why people are going to reform. Perhaps they think that reform will do that for them. But I personally think that reform is only going to make things a great deal worse for everybody and cause a great deal more chaos in everyone's lives.
Do you think that there is a party or any space in politics that is representing disabled people and the interests of disabled people?
I don't think disabled people, neurodivergent people should be labelled as other. They're
Yes.
part of society. All of politics, every party, every policy, every way that we interpret the world needs to consider all of these aspects that meet everyone else's needs. It's not for disabled people or neurodivergent people to accommodate themselves to the world. It's for society as a whole, for the rest of the world, to build a society that benefits from disabled people and benefits from neurodivergent people. Because at the moment, those people have so much to contribute to society and are being left out. So it's for others to change, not for disabled people to feel guilt, shame, how they are.
Lastly, as an autistic person or neurodivergent person yourself, what one thing would you like to see change? If you could change one thing in society, what would you like that one thing to be?
But Wales has historically been pretty good at advancing some groundbreaking policies, as the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, which I think was 10 years old this year. I read that the autism bill, which was first put forward to the Senate in 2019, as maybe making a comeback. There's been a great deal more money, not enough, but some more, I think 12 million, something like that, put into autism, neurodiverse education and medical care recently by the Senate. So I would like to see those type of measures, but mainly I would like to see everything in society being inclusive without it being mandated. It's about changing everybody's mindset.
Lastly, is there anything else you want to say that you haven't got a chance to say already? Anything that you might want to tell people that find you or follow you on social media? Any last things you might want to tell people? That any last final words or message that you want to conclude the episode on?
So if you're interested in seeing what I'm up to, then I love Instagram as my visual person. Simon Paul Hobson there. Obviously, I would push and hope people would go to new.wales, which is the New Wales website. The podcasts which I'm hosting for New Wales, Blueprint Cymru, the first one is going to be launched on the 12th of June, so very soon. And so I hope that people would listen to that. We're going to have some really great and interesting people on that. We've got some fantastic ways of seeing the future of Wales.